Okay, so today we're going to really dive into the XDC network.
Yeah.
And, we've got a ton of stuff to look at.
We do.
We've got news articles you sent me from newsjournal.com and trcrypto.news, some market stuff from Fubs Crypto, some things from the XDC Network's own website, and even some price predictions from Cryptopolitan.
Yeah, so a pretty good spread of sources.
Yeah, so I think, the mission for us today is to kind of try to pull out the most important things and really give people a solid understanding of what is this XDC network, what's been going on with it recently, and why should anyone even care?
Right. Yeah, and I think especially, with all the talk of, blockchain and real-world asset tokenization.
Yeah.
Where does XDC kind of fit in all that?
Right, exactly. So I think, if we focus on the things that seem to be coming up the most in the stuff you sent me, I think we should start with, what even is this XDC network?
Yeah.
What's the tech behind it? What's it trying to do?
Sure. So at its heart, the XDC network is what's called an enterprise-grade Layer 1 blockchain.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is it was actually designed specifically to support trade finance and this whole idea of tokenizing real-world assets.
Not just any blockchain, but one for real-world stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So think about things like commodities or real estate or even things like invoices, turning these physical and financial things into digital tokens on a blockchain.
So it's not just a general purpose blockchain. It has a very specific kind of focus.
Right, precisely. Yeah, and to make it even more useful, it's what we call EVM compatible.
Okay.
So if you know about Ethereum, this means that it can actually work with all the same tools and applications that developers have built for Ethereum.
Got it. So it's kind of like tapping into this, pre-existing ecosystem.
Exactly. It lowers the barrier for entry, for new projects and new developers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so now how does this thing even work?
Right.
I saw something about delegated proof of stake.
Yes.
What is that? And how does that impact how secure it is, how fast the transactions are, all that stuff?
Yeah, so delegated proof of stake, or DPoS, is the consensus mechanism that STC uses.
Okay.
So in very simple terms, people who hold the XDC token can vote for a set of delegates.
Okay.
And those delegates are called masternodes.
Okay.
And it's these masternodes that are responsible for actually validating all the transactions and securing the network.
Got it. Okay.
And compared to some other approaches, this DPoS gives you some pretty interesting benefits.
Like what specifically?
Well, for STC, it means to get high security, really fast transaction times. We're talking around 2 seconds, according to the stuff you sent.
Wow, that's super fast.
Yeah. And also really good scalability, so it can handle something like 2,000 transactions per second.
2,000 TPS, that's a lot.
It is.
Okay. I also saw this thing in the Forbes data that said KYC to masternodes.
Right.
That sounds very deliberate. Why is it important to know who these validator nodes are?
Yeah, that's actually a key differentiator for XDC, especially when you're thinking about adoption by, bigger institutions and regulatory requirements.
Right.
So by requiring know your customer for the masternodes, it brings in a level of accountability and trust, which is really important for people who want to deal with regulated assets. They want to know who's running the show.
So basically, they've tried to set this up in a way where it's more friendly to the existing financial world.
Exactly, yeah. And especially for making trade finance more efficient and bringing all these real-world assets onto the blockchain, but in a compliant way.
Right.
It's all about finding that balance,
And they've actually been working on this RWA tokenization stuff for a while, right?
Yeah, the XDC website says they've been doing it for 5 years.
5 years, wow.
Which is, a pretty long time in this space.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant head start.
It is.
Okay, so we've got a good idea of what it is and, what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So what's all this about the RWA Accelerator Program?
Yeah, so this was something that Plug and Play announced.
Right.
They're a pretty big innovation platform.
Yeah.
And they basically unveiled the participants in this program on March 18th, 2025.
Okay.
It's a 3-month program. And it's completely focused on innovating in the tokenization of real-world assets.
And they're doing this in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, at their headquarters.
Which makes sense, and they're partnering with the XDC Foundation directly for this.
Yeah, so it's a real collaboration, showing that they're both committed to, getting this RWA tokenization going on the XDC network.
Yeah.
The goal is to really push the development of, cutting-edge applications in this area.
Okay.
And a really important part is that all of the projects that were selected for this program have to integrate with the XDC network.
Right.
So it's all built around XDC.
Okay. So How many people applied to this thing?
So the newsjournal.com article said that there were 100 applications.
100? Wow. So there's definitely a lot of interest in this whole area.
Yeah, there's a lot of activity, a lot of people trying to get involved.
Right.
And ultimately, they narrowed it down to 11 projects.
11, okay.
And they represent a pretty good mix of, different ways to use blockchain for real-world assets.
Okay, so who are some of these projects that were chosen?
Yeah, so there were some familiar names in there, like Blockticity, Clearpool, and Plume.
Yeah, what are they working on?
So Blockticity is focused on bringing more transparency to supply chains.
Okay.
So, using their tech businesses could track, where their goods are coming from, how they're moving, using tokenized goods on the XDC network.
So cutting down on things like counterfeiting and all that.
Exactly, making things much more transparent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then there's Clearpool, and they're aiming to really kind of revolutionize institutional lending with DeFi. And there's CredDeFi working on decentralized credit solutions, and InvestTax, which is a digital asset exchange.
Got it.
Nomex is another DeFi platform. Polytrade is focusing on trade finance assets.
Okay.
Plume is interesting because they already secure something like billions in real-world assets.
Wow, that's a huge amount.
Yeah, it is. There's Tokeny, who provides tokenization services. TouchBrick is a blockchain development firm.
Okay.
Zero Hash is offering digital asset infrastructure.
Got it.
And then there's Zoff, which is another player in the DeFi space.
So it's a pretty broad spectrum of different applications here.
It is, yeah, covering a lot of different aspects of this whole real-world asset tokenization landscape.
Right. And it sounds like they're pretty excited about the program, too.
Yeah, they are. The newsjournal.com article actually had some quotes from some of the participants.
Oh, okay.
So Chris Yin, the co-founder of Plume, said that, this was a fantastic opportunity for them to expand globally.
Okay.
And to really change how the real world interacts on-chain. They were calling it RWA fee.
RWA fee, okay.
Which is kind of a catchy term,
Yeah.
And he pointed out that their platform already secures a lot of real-world assets.
So they've got some serious skin in the game already.
They do.
Okay, what about some of the other people?
Yeah, so Jayo Prombickler, the CEO and co-founder of Clearpool, said that this was a major chance for them to push their mission of transforming institutional lending with DeFi.
Okay.
They really want to use plug-and-play's network and the specific things that XDC is good at to build new compliant financial products.
Right.
To really connect traditional finance and blockchain.
So it's not just about the tech itself, it's about building those bridges and connections.
Exactly, yeah, making it work in the real world.
Okay, so it seems like this accelerator program is, a pretty big deal.
It is. It gives all these projects, this amazing opportunity to work directly with XDC executives.
Right.
And to tap into Plug and Play's huge network of partners.
Yeah.
Which could be, incredibly valuable for startups trying to grow and gain traction.
For sure.
And this whole program actually culminates in the Plug and Play Silicon Valley June Summit.
Oh, wow. So that's a pretty big stage for them.
It is. It's a chance for them to really showcase what they've been building to a really important audience.
Right.
So, you'll have venture capitalists there looking for, the next big thing. You'll have big Fortune 500 companies exploring blockchain.
Okay.
Government representatives who are interested in the technology, and universities that are, doing research and innovation.
Wow. So that's a pretty powerful group of people.
It is. Yeah. It's the kind of audience that can really drive adoption and investment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this RWA accelerator program seems like a really important part of the XDC ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely.
So what about some of these other partnerships that you mentioned?
Right.
Especially the ones with Mercado Bitcoin in Brazil and ArchAccess.
Yeah, these are really interesting, and they really show how much XDC is growing, on a global scale.
Okay.
So working with Mercado Bitcoin, which is the biggest crypto exchange in Brazil, that's a big deal.
Yeah, Brazil's a huge market.
It is a huge market, and they're partnering to expand the whole market for tokenized real-world assets globally.
Wow.
And they're going to use XDC's infrastructure to support Mercado Bitcoin's tokenized investment products.
So that's a pretty significant move into Latin America.
It is.
Okay, and what about ArchAccess? What's going on there?
So they're a digital asset exchange regulated by the FCA in the UK.
Okay, so that's a big deal in terms of compliance.
Yeah, it shows they're serious. Yeah.
Oh, right.
And they're working with XDC to launch fund tokens on the XDC blockchain.
Okay.
And this includes money market funds from some pretty big names like BlackRock and Fidelity International.
Wow, so those are some very well-established traditional finance companies.
They are. So bringing these kinds of products onto the XDC network, in a regulated way is a massive step towards getting institutions to accept this technology.
Yeah, having those big players on board definitely adds a lot of credibility.
It does.
Okay, and there was also something about an XDC Payments Program in Seoul?
Right. Yeah, this is another really smart move,
Yeah.
connecting Korean Web3 startups, developers, and innovators with XDC's enterprise blockchain solutions.
And South Korea is another really tech-savvy country.
It is, yeah. They have a really dynamic and innovative blockchain ecosystem.
Right.
So this program could lead to some really cool developments and, get more people using XDC in Asia.
So they're really making a push to expand their ecosystem, through these partnerships and programs.
They are, yeah. It's a very strategic approach.
In some pretty key global regions.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the XDC token itself.
Okay.
The price has been doing pretty well lately.
It has, yeah. trcrypto.news said that on March 20th, XDC broke out of this downtrend that had been going on for weeks.
Okay.
And it surged around 10% to hit an intraday high of $0.072.
Wow, that's a big jump.
It is, yeah, and it pushed the price above this key resistance level that it had been kind of struggling to get past.
Yeah, and the market cap and the trading volume went up too, right?
Yeah, the market cap went over $1.1 billion.
Okay.
And the daily trading volume spiked by about 25% to almost $40 million.
Wow, so a lot more people are buying and selling it.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of interest.
And the news articles kind of linked this to, those partnership announcements,
right.
Seeing it as a sign that, institutions are starting to take tokenized assets more seriously.
Yeah, and, real-world applications and institutional buy-in that tends to make investors feel a lot more positive.
Makes sense. Okay, and what about the technical analysis that trcrypto.news mentioned?
Yeah, so they said that XDC had broken through this $0.07 resistance level on the 4-hour chart.
Okay.
And that it looked like it was about to break out of what's called a descending parallel channel.
Now, for people who aren't, experts in technical analysis, what does that actually mean?
So basically, it's a bullish signal. It means that the price is more likely to go up.
Okay.
Because the downward pressure that was holding it down is weakening.
Got it.
And the fact that XDC was testing the top of that channel, it meant that buyers were starting to take control.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there were some other indicators too, right?
Yeah, there were things like the Arun up and the MACD.
Can you break those down for us a little bit?
Sure. So the Arun up and the Arun down, they measure how strong a price trend is.
Okay.
So when the Arun up is much higher than the Arun down, it usually means that a bullish trend is getting stronger.
Got it.
And the MACD, which stands for Moving Average Convergence Divergence.
Okay.
When those lines are pointing up, it also shows that there's more buying momentum.
So basically all signs point to, the price going up.
Yeah, at least in the short term.
Okay, so what kind of price targets were they talking about?
So they mentioned $0.080 as the next resistance level.
Okay.
If it can break through that and stay above it, then they said the next target could be $0.103, which was the high from mid-February.
So those are some pretty significant potential gains.
They are, yeah.
And Forbes had some specific prices too, right?
Yeah, they said it was trading between about $0.070 and $0.07517 on March 20th and 21st.
Okay.
With 24-hour increases between about 2% and almost 7%.
Oh, pretty solid growth.
Yeah, definitely moving in the right direction.
It's also good to know, the historical highs and lows.
Right. So Forbes said the all-time high for XDC was $0.1939 back in August 2021.
Okay.
And the all-time low was $0.00395 in July 2019.
So it's come a long way.
It has. It has.
Yeah.
And, the market cap is currently around $1.19 billion.
Okay.
With a circulating supply of about 15.7 billion XDC tokens.
Got it.
And the total supply is capped at 37.5 billion tokens.
Right. And it's important to remember, who's behind this whole thing.
Yeah, the founders are Atul Kakad, Ritesh Kakad, and initially Karan Hardwaj.
Okay.
They launched the network in 2018, and the mainnet went live in 2019.
Okay. So it's good to understand, the team and the token supply.
Yeah, it gives you more context, when you're thinking about the long term.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's go back to what makes XDC unique.
Okay.
We touched on some of this, but what are its key selling points?
Yeah, so one of the big things is that it was designed to be compatible with existing financial systems.
Right.
They're not trying to completely replace everything overnight.
Okay.
They want to make it easier for governments, financial institutions, big organizations to transition to decentralized protocols.
So it's more about bridging the gap.
Exactly. Yeah, working with what's already there.
And they're really focused on trade finance?
Yeah, that's a big part of their mission.
Okay, and what about this hybrid blockchain architecture that they talk about?
Right. So that means that they're combining elements of both public and private blockchains.
Okay.
So, the main transaction records might be public for transparency.
Right.
But certain parts of the network might be private or permissioned,
Okay.
especially when you're dealing with sensitive data or you need specific permissions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's a way to balance transparency with the need for control and privacy, which is really important for big companies.
Right, and the DPoS consensus mechanism that we talked about,
Yeah.
it's not just about speed, it's also about scalability and sustainability, right?
Right, exactly. So DPoS uses a lot less energy than some other methods,
Okay.
which is good for the environment, and it's designed to handle more and more transactions without slowing down.
Which is really important for real-world use.
Exactly. Yeah, you need it to be reliable.
Okay, so one last thing. What about those future price predictions from Cryptopolitan?
Right. So obviously, we have to take these with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
but their analysts were pretty optimistic.
Okay.
So for the end of 2025, they said XDC could potentially reach $0.141
Wow.
with an average price around 0.117.
Okay.
For 2028, they predicted a range between 0.329 and 0.377.
Okay.
And by 2031, they said the maximum price could be 0.612.
That's a pretty big jump.
It is, yeah. But of course, the crypto market is unpredictable.
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen.
Right. And they did say that there was a range of opinions among analysts,
Okay.
with some being even more bullish long term.
Okay, so I guess the main takeaway is that, there's definitely a lot of potential.
There is, yeah.
But we have to be realistic.
Exactly. These are just projections.
But they're interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so to kind of sum up everything you've been saying, XDC is trying to solve some real-world problems.
Right.
Especially in global trade finance and this whole area of tokenizing real-world assets.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not just about, theoretical concepts.
Right.
It's about making real changes in how businesses operate.
And they're really pushing for adoption through this accelerator program and these partnerships.
Yeah, they're really making moves.
And the market seems to be responding well.
Yeah, investors are definitely paying attention.
So, price predictions aside, it looks like they're on the right track.
It does seem that way, yeah.
What I find really fascinating is that, they're connecting this digital asset world with very traditional industries.
Yeah, it's a real bridge between two worlds.
And it's not just about, cryptocurrency. It's about changing how real-world assets are managed and traded.
Right.
And how to make them more accessible.
It's a potential game changer,
Yeah, so for anyone listening, think about this.
Yeah.
How could this tokenization of real-world assets change the future of finance and global commerce?
Right. What kind of impact could it have?
And what role could networks like XDC play in all of this?
It's something to really keep an eye on.
It is definitely a space to watch.
For sure. For sure.
All right, well, this has been super interesting.
It has, yeah.
I've learned a lot.
Me too. Me too.
Thanks for coming on.
No problem. It was great to be here.
Okay, and to everyone listening, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.